Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take the fascinating sources you share with us and, well, we really try to unpack them. Today, you've given us some truly thought-provoking material. It definitely challenges some conventional historical takes. We're diving deep into a text called Israel, the Fortress of the Lorekeepers. Now, this isn't going to be your typical history rundown. Our goal today is to explore, pretty objectively, a very specific and detailed account of how modern Israel was formed. The source presents it as something, well, much more complex, maybe more strategically planned than how it's commonly understood. And just to be clear up front, our job here is to relay the ideas and the claims within this specific text. We're not here to endorse them or say they're historically accurate. We just want to understand how this particular narrative is built, what arguments it makes, and what it asks us and you to think about.
Indeed. And this source material, it offers a really unique lens. It portrays the creation of modern Israel not as, say, a singular political movement or just a reaction to world events. Instead, it frames it as a, and I'm quoting here, profound and multi-generational project. So for anyone familiar with the standard histories, this text presents a very different, maybe even speculative narrative. It connects historical dots in ways that, many might not expect. It invites us to look at a kind of behind-the-scenes story, often using its own specific terms.
Okay, so let's unpack that central idea then. The text, Israel, the Fortress of the Lorekeepers. It argues that forming the modern state of Israel isn't mainly about political Zionism, which is often how we view it, right? Instead, it frames it as this profound and multi-generational project of the Oki Club. And that's the term they use. The source actually calls it a masterstroke in their long-term game. That's game in all caps in the text. And it goes further. It suggests the Rothschild dynasty's involvement isn't just about money, but it's presented as a literal account of the players building a modern sovereign enclave for their most ancient and sacred lineage. So right away, that shifts the whole perspective, doesn't it? From just geopolitics to something older, more deliberate, according to this source.
Yes, and what's compelling, I think, is how the source immediately sets up this huge overarching story. It's not just an event in time. It's presented as this meticulously planned thing spanning generations and attributed to this specific group, the Oki Club. The Rothschilds are then placed within that, not just as financiers, but as key figures implementing this grand game. It completely reframes the historical context, moving way beyond the usual political or socioeconomic explanations we hear. The core idea the source wants you to get is that this wasn't just something that happened to people, but an intentional, proactive game played over centuries with very specific goals. That word masterstroke alone suggests this high level of strategic thinking and foresight.
Right. And who exactly are these architects of the game that the source talks about? It lays it out very clearly. The Rothschilds, also known by this symbolic name, Red Shield, are described as the hereditary treasurers of the Oki Club. Months ago. But then, get this, it explicitly identifies them as the modern successors to the Knights Templar. Now, that is a striking claim. It connects these, almost legendary ancient orders with modern events through this one family. And the text insists their role in founding Israel confirms their status as the, quote, financial architects of the game.
And if we try to connect that to the bigger picture the source is painting, it presents the Rothschilds not just as, powerful bankers lending money. It casts them as having this integral, inherited leadership role within the Oki Club. That direct link it makes to orders like the Knights Templar, well, it elevates their role from just wealthy individuals, custodians of a much older legacy. It implies this continuity of purpose spanning centuries. And being treasurers in this context, it suggests more than just managing funds. It implies deep, long-term financial strategy and control, basically building the whole project described in the source. The text really emphasizes a lineage entrusted with huge resources and this centuries-old agenda.
Okay, then the source goes on to make this really intriguing claim about the nature of the project itself in Palestine. It calls their work an enduring social experiment and stresses this is a literal truth. So according to this text, they weren't just building a nation like we normally think of it. They were actually constructing a new modern game board on the most sacred ground on earth, the Bullseye of Jerusalem. Oh, wow. That framing, it implies something much more than just territory, almost like setting a stage.
Well, that raises a really important question for us to consider, doesn't it? What does it mean for a nation state to be called an enduring social experiment in this specific context? The source is quite adamant, as you said, it's literal truth, not just a figure of speech. That framing totally changes how you might perceive the motivations behind it, suggesting a controlled, maybe evolving societal model rather than just organic growth. And the emphasis on Jerusalem as the bullseye, I mean, that points to an extraordinary symbolic and strategic importance for that specific location. It's not just another place on the map, it's the absolute focal point central to this whole complex game being played out. It's the main stage or the nexus for these supposed long-term goals.
Right. So moving beyond the architects and the nature of it all, the fourth thing gets into details about a fascinating perfect division of labor among these players in the Rothschild family.
Yeah.
It highlights two key figures, Edmund de Rothschild and Lionel Walter Rothschild, and their very distinct roles. Edmund de Rothschild, he's described as the builder, so responsible for the physical stuff, like training swamps to create usable land, funding colonies, setting up infrastructure, the real tangible on-the-ground work. And then you have Lionel Walter Rothschild. He's presented as the broker, his vital role, securing the political paperwork. Specifically, the text points to getting the Balfour Declaration from, and this is the source's term, the British ringmasters. It paints a picture of a very deliberate, coordinated effort, doesn't it?
It really does. This division of labor, as the source describes it, suggests a highly organized, almost corporate-style approach to building a nation. It's quite far from the idea of spontaneous movements or just reactive diplomacy. You have one figure, Edmund, managing the tangible development, making sure the physical structures are there. And at the same time, Lionel is navigating the complex international political scene, securing that crucial backing, like the Balfour Declaration. And that striking language used for the British ringmasters, it reinforces this idea of a controlled, orchestrated game on a global stage, where, according to the source, powerful players are sort of directed or manipulated towards a specific outcome by these players. It suggests a deep level of planning, covering both the physical and political groundwork.
Okay, so the source then digs into what it calls the foundations of the new temple. It explains that the Rothschilds didn't just, buy up a lot of land. Their strategy, as presented here, was much deeper. They apparently strategically built three core pillars for this modern sovereign enclave. And the stated reason, according to the text, was explicitly to make sure their Lorekeepers would be protected and empowered. So these weren't just random institutions. They were foundational pieces with specific linked purposes. First pillar, the political pillar. They financed the Knesset, the parliament building. The source calls this creating the new profane court and senate, intended as the political engine for the new game. So the main legislative body. Second, the legal pillar. They financed the Supreme Court. This established what the text calls a new profane system of law. And this system was supposedly designed to align the enclave's rules with their specific long-term objectives, law and order, but with this underlying strategic aim. And third, maybe the most interesting one, the lore pillar. They financed the National Library. The source describes this as creating a new, modern, and centralized archive for the sacred lore, and it explicitly calls it a successor to the ancient Temple of Solomon. That's a very powerful connection to make.
So what does this mean for you, the listener, thinking about this? The building of these three pillars, political, legal, and cultural, it really shows an incredibly comprehensive, integrated strategy, according to this text. It's not just about land or people, it's about setting up a whole self-sustaining system, a functioning state machine. But what's particularly insightful, I think, is the source's specific word choice, calling the political and legal pillars profane. That suggests that, in the hierarchy presented by this source, these essential institutions for governance are seen as, earthly functional tools. They serve the higher, supposedly sacred purpose embodied by the National Library. That library is defined as this modern home for sacred lore, directly linking it back to the ancient Temple of Solomon. This framing puts a huge emphasis on preserving knowledge, heritage, and a specific lineage within this enclave. It suggests the project's ultimate goal, in this view, goes way beyond normal statecraft into something like spiritual or historical guardianship, with the modern state acting as a protective shell.
Right. To bring it all together, the source concludes that creating modern Israel wasn't just significant, it was one of the most significant moves in the entire game. It wasn't sudden. It was, quoting again, a multi-century project by the Oak Club, funded and carefully managed by their chief treasurers, the Rothschilds. And the ultimate goal, as stated, to create a secure sovereign fortress for their most ancient and important lineage, the Semitic peoples. And here's where the narrative really broadens out. It was a quest to ensure that the keepers of the lore would have a powerful modern temple from which to play their crucial part in the final stages of the Great Cycle.
Yeah, that final summary from the source really gives the grand overarching purpose behind everything else we've discussed. The project, as it's described, is explicitly called a fortress, designed to protect this specific ancient lineage, the Semitic peoples. And furthermore, it aims to empower these keepers of the lore, not just for now, but for what the text calls the final stages of the Great Cycle. That adds this cosmic, really long-term vision to the whole thing. It portrays it as a pivotal move within a much larger, ongoing historical, or maybe even spiritual game. It suggests this profound sense of destiny, a preordained role for this fortress and its people in some grander scheme that goes beyond ordinary history.
And there you have it, a deep dive into a text that, well, it definitely reimagines the foundations of modern Israel. It paints this picture of a multi-generational game orchestrated by the Oak Key Club and the Rothschilds. A narrative full of builders, brokers, and these carefully designed pillars, all set up to create a fortress for lore keepers preparing for a great cycle.
Wow.
It's a fascinating, complex, and certainly a very thought-provoking perspective on history, as presented by this particular source.
Absolutely. The sheer depth of planning and the symbolic weight given to every element, from funding the Knesset to linking the National Library to Solomon's Temple, it really makes you consider the many layers of historical interpretation that can exist. This source asks us to think about the idea that history isn't always just what appears on the surface, that according to this text at least, some historical narratives might be far more complex, maybe much older in their origins, stretching back through generations, even ancient orders, older than we typically imagine.
Indeed. So what stands out to you after hearing this particular account? How does this perspective, even just as a unique interpretation presented by this source, challenge or maybe expand your view of the region's history? Thank you for sharing these incredible sources with us and for joining us on this deep dive. We really look forward to seeing what fascinating materials you bring us next time.